And we're live, and welcome back to the CODESHO podcast, everybody. In this episode, we are going to be talking a little bit about new tech versus old tech. We're going to be talking about those soft skills again, how to make yourself a linchpin, how to not just be another cog in the machine, maybe a little bit about striving to be just more than average, and just some Q&A at the end. But to start things off as usual, we're going to be talking about the latest tech news, and the first thing we got here on the list is the iPhone 12 and what we're expecting to see from that. So it looks like as of right now, it's just a lot of just leaks and stuff like that. So I'm going to pull up some screenshots that we have here, some leaked screenshots. So here's a Forbes article. And some of the stuff that we've been seeing is that it looks like the new design is going to be a little bit more like the iPad Pro. I don't think we're super certain yet whether or not it's going to be USB-C. That would be super cool. Speaking of new tech versus old tech, Apple seems to really like the Lightning cable, but it seems like everybody kind of wants the USB-C.
I don't have an iPhone. Is that not USB-C yet?
No, it's still Lightning cable.
Oh, but the iPads are.
The iPads are. And the iPad Pro was released with USB-C before the latest iPhone. So it's kind of crappy. It's like Apple's trying to make this huge push to USB-C with the MacBooks and with the iPads, but like not the iPhone. I can't imagine why. I think it might have something. I heard somebody say that it had something to do with the fact that the USB-C cable is like thicker, like taller, I guess, than the Lightning cable. So they're able to get the phone slimmer with Lightning. But I think I speak for the entire iPhone owning community when I say we will take the extra millimeter if it means that we can have extra battery life and a universal cable.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy. So anyway, so it looks like they're going for that design. Who knows if it'll be the USB-C. The other thing that I'm super psyched about is the like smaller bezels right here. It just like it's getting closer and closer to just the edge of the phone, which is going to be really awesome. It looks like also they're going to go for a fourth I don't think it's a fourth camera. I think this is just some other kind of sensor or something. But anyways, the new design is looking really sleek. Like I'm a big fan of them going towards that like rigid square metal look or whatever. So
I heard there people are speculating there's like the new color. Like I guess last time they released like a midnight green, and then they're saying that this time they might do some kind of like a blue.
Okay. Yeah, that one right there.
Yeah, that's what I read about that. That's what I was looking at.
Yeah, that's a pretty sleek color. I
like it. Looks cool.
I don't know why with the last iteration they only really did the cool colors on the iPhone 11, not the Pro. Like the Pros had some colors too, but they got really creative with the regular iPhone 11 colors. So anyways, the other thing with the new one is that it's supposedly going to have a 120 hertz display, which for those of you that have not used an iPad Pro is insane. It looks so awesome. Huge fan of the 120 hertz. Those naysayers that say that like you can't tell the difference, BS. You can tell the difference. It is awesome. It's really, really cool. The other thing is that it looks like, I don't know if this is complete truth or not, but apparently Apple's not using Samsung for their OLED displays anymore, which is kind of a big shift because I think like for like a long time, if not forever, Samsung's been making their displays. So I think now they're looking at using LG, which they use LG for a lot of other stuff too, like their new monitors and stuff like that. So there's that, and then I guess there's also speculation, if not confirmation at this point, that it's going to be a little bit delayed, the new release. So I guess we'll see. Typical Apple, we don't really know anything yet. So
they're going to announce this. Are they going to announce this at WWDC? Is it generally when they do it?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I always think this every year, and then I can't remember. I think they do. I mean, obviously they announced the new iOS version and stuff. I don't think that they confirm the actual release date though until later in the year. But it's usually September.
Okay.
So I think they're speculating this year it might be like November or something like that. So anyways, that's the iPhone 12. The next thing still Apple related in the tech news is the Android and iOS conferences. So it looks like they haven't confirmed one yet.
Yeah. So like usually the Android Dev Summit is right around the same time as WWDC. And I was looking this year. I haven't seen anything about it for 2020. There's a whole bunch of there's like DroidCon and there's like a bunch of Kotlin conferences that are like some are official, like whatever, like Kotlin, and they'll do it worldwide. But so far, nothing for like the official Google one.
It's a weird time to be alive, like because it's hard to. I'm sure it has something to do with COVID, but who knows? Yeah. I guess Apple's approach was to go just fully remote. So that's the thing with it this year is there's no more lottery to actually go to the conference. It's fully remote this year, which they always have a remote version as well. But apparently this year there's going to be no audience. So
you actually, I guess I watched it last year too. Do you just go to the website and like you just like sign in?
Yeah.
I know they have an app.
Yes, they do.
What's the purpose of the app?
I think it's just to have a way to access it.
Just like really quick. Okay,
Yeah,
I see.
So, so there's that. But as far as what they're going to talk about in WWDC this year, I mean, it's always exciting. Apple always does a bunch of stuff, it seems like, especially lately with them focusing more on software than hardware. I'm really excited to see what they come with. I think everybody's really hoping that we get like a Swift UI V2, so to speak, like an improved version, because there's still a lot of like limitations with Swift UI in its current state. So it's hard for a lot of companies to move over to a fully Swift UI production application right now. So I think everybody's really hoping that that they bring that up in the next one. So there's that. The next thing is this is kind of like older news, but still kind of worth talking about. I think about a month and a half ago, GitHub announced that they are going to be allowing unlimited private repos for teams, which is pretty cool.
So there's like two systems basically. They're like me or you as an individual user, we can collaborate with whoever we want on private repos. Free private repos has only been around for just over a year.
But that's limited to 3 people.
It was. Now
right.
It's not.
Right. Now it's not.
Now it's not. Yeah. So originally, like private repos weren't a thing. Like you couldn't even have that. You would have to pay $5 a month for like 3 private repos. In 2019, early 2019, it was like you could collaborate with up to 3 people. And now it's unlimited. You can collaborate unlimited. There is still a paid service called GitHub Teams, and I don't know everything related to that, but I do know Teams can have like subfolders. Like I don't know, maybe not everybody uses that, but you can organize your repos a little bit better. I've worked at a company that had like like their own server. They were running their own server, but they were using a team, and you could like organize the repos better. I'm sure there's other features as well, but for us, we don't care.
I mean, that's for more like enterprise.
Yeah, exactly. So. Like you have like, lots and lots and lots of projects that you need to work on with lots of departments.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really cool move for GitHub, and it seems like the Microsoft acquisition of GitHub probably has a lot to do with that. Seems like this is not long after they acquired GitHub, so it seems like Microsoft is trying to like make a pivotal move towards like this more open source supportive company, which is really cool. There's a lot of people that think that early on Microsoft didn't do a good enough job of supporting the open source community and supporting developers, and it seems like they're definitely nowadays trying to hard push towards that. So that's cool to see from them. I'm excited to see where Microsoft goes with GitHub and all their technologies. Obviously, like seems like a lot of developers definitely side with Apple more than Microsoft. Not all, but seems like a lot do. And I think there's many reasons for that. One being kind of like you've said before, that Mac tends to be a little bit more personalized. It's also easier for web developers because the fact that it's like a Linux-based operating system.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. But I don't want to just hate Microsoft. Like I acknowledge the impact that they've had on the world, and I'm excited to see them support developers more in the future.
Well, we both work with that one guy who constantly rips on the Mac machines.
You know who you are.
Yeah, you know who you are. He loves Microsoft, and I'm not saying that he's wrong. It's just for the stuff that I've worked on, I prefer Mac. I like the Linux command line. I know that like Windows 10 has that option where you can install like the bash console. Actually, I'm wrong. Mac is actually switching over to like the Zish shell as the standard, which is the one I use anyway. But I know Windows 10 was moving over to have the option of having a bash shell like native, which is like really cool.
Yeah. Obviously for us too, specifically, like I work on, you do too, as a mobile developer, if you're going to be working on the iOS platform, unfortunately, you just don't have a choice. You have to go with Mac unless you want to do like a virtual machine or something like that. But that's too much of a pain. We've seen that before. It's just hell trying to actually get that to work. So anyways, that's it with Microsoft and GitHub. And the last kind of story we have here in tech news, this one's really funny, actually. Here, I'll let you take the reins on this one while I pull the article up.
Yeah. So I forget the guy's name, but it's not important. But in like 2017, this guy, he was a kind of like nerdy programmer. He was coming up with like a personalized license plate, and he wanted to do something kind of nerdy. Originally, he was going to pick something like segfault, but he settled on null, and he wanted to get void for his wife, so that in their like parking lot, it would say null and void. And then he was kind of joking around. He was hoping that it would help him get out of tickets because, like, let's say he had a speeding ticket and the cop pulled him, was entering it into the system, and like he would be entering in null for the license plate, and he was hoping it just like wouldn't compute. Anyway, so like that didn't happen, but in like 2018, he got some random, like he didn't think anything of it, but he got some random like $30, $20 ticket, and like I said, for whatever reason he paid it, and it wasn't in his name. He thought somebody had like scraped his license plate or something.
Yeah, he didn't think it was his.
Yeah. And then, but then as the year was rolling by, more and more tickets were coming in, like $30, $40, like, $80, these big tickets. And the problem was, as whoever, like the police officers, as they were entering in the license plate, if there was any kind of mistakes in the form, or like if they forgot to fill out that form within the database, it would be null. And so then all of those null tickets got associated with his license plate, and so they were all getting sent to him. So instead of him getting out of tickets, he actually ended up getting lots and lots and lots.
Yeah, that's so hilarious. Trying to get out of the tickets, and that backfired hard, my dude. That's so funny. Yeah, it's there's like so many things that occur as a software engineer with null. Like, you always expect this to happen, but sometimes it doesn't get casted correctly, or it doesn't get translated properly. Or
it's interesting if you pay attention in video games. Like sometimes you'll see null in like a menu screen. I was playing back when Red Dead Redemption came out and they had the online version. So like there's certain numbers that you just start to pay attention to. And so one of them would be like 4.2 billion, which is like max int, right? And so in Red Dead Redemption, I was looking at this, like it was like the first day it came out, and I was looking at like the score screen or whatever, and it was just a list of like that 4.2 billion, right? And so what I think happened was everyone was actually at 0, but sometimes like a default value that you'll give, like a score, will be -1, right? So you'll say like, well, -1 isn't actually a score. And so if it's -1, then we can, we know nothing has been set.
Yeah.
But the problem is, for an unsigned value, if you make it -1, it wraps around. So everything was like that 4.2 billion.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a funny.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's. I know this isn't the topic. We didn't even have this written down, but I just think it is funny that like you get a huge appreciation for game developers early on when you realize how many updates come out all the time for these games now. And it's like, if you have an issue like that you can, we messed that up, we'll get that fixed or whatever.
Because on Super Nintendo, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, you just couldn't do that. So it's pretty funny. And like, dude, nowadays, these game developers, sometimes they just know the game's not complete and they still release it just knowing we'll add more features later. So
that's kind of controversial as well, because sometimes those new features come out as DLC.
Yeah.
People don't like that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, so mad props to the people of the Nintendo days and the Sega Dreamcast days, and back then. So, anyways, that's our tech news for today. Kind of getting into the meat and potatoes here. Like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about new tech versus old tech and how it applies to developers versus consumers. I mean, what it means for the consumer, what it means for the developer, and so I guess to kind of kick things off, we're going to talk about storyboards and Swift UI a little bit. Swift UI, that seems like everything that Apple does, whether it's Swift UI or just Swift replacing Objective-C, the developer community is the first one to sometimes complain, which really bothers me. They just don't have an appreciation for where this could go yet, and they know so well how to use the old technology that they don't want to adopt the new one. But I will say, actually, I have to take that back, because Swift UI is really unique in that everybody was super excited to hear about it. And even though people know how to use storyboards, like people just hate them. You know what I mean? So this is an example where the developer community is like fully embracing it. And not only that, but it actually doesn't have any real impact on the user or the consumer end, assuming you write bugless code, which we obviously don't. In theory, maybe SwiftUI can prevent like update bugs and stuff like that. But yeah, it's
So the question that, obviously this is iOS, so it's more geared towards you, but I'm curious about this. The reason I wanted to talk about this was because if somebody is starting to learn iOS development right now, this is where this originally came from. If somebody's going to start to learn iOS development right now, obviously the future seems to be SwiftUI, but so much of the past is storyboard. How would you recommend? Would you say like jump 100% into SwiftUI even though it's not done, like it's going to be buggy? Would you say go storyboard route only for now until it's...
Yeah, I would say this is always a tough one when Apple makes or any technology makes these huge moves towards a completely new like framework or whatever. I would have to say, me answering right now, I would fully jump in with Storyboard and UI Kit. I would right now I would look at SwiftUI as like a luxury that we can learn later on, like this new feature. And that's primarily because any job that you get right now is going to more than likely have storyboards. It's more than likely going to utilize UI Kit. And even if they don't use storyboards, it's still important to understand UI Kit because they're probably still doing programmatic layouts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I would say if you're a new developer, get really acquainted with iOS using storyboards and using programmatic layouts. My opinion on programmatic layouts is a lot of people really like them because they really hate storyboards. I really like storyboards. Regardless, storyboards and the UI Kit framework, they're kind of synonymous they're kind of synonymous in the fact that they use the same components. Like you're still going to use UI views, whether that's in a storyboard or in a programmatic layout, you're still going to use them. Or if it's a UI switch or UI button, it's the same components. One's just a visual way of composing the view. So anyways, I'm sort of rambling here. My answer is that I would go with storyboards for now and or programmatic layouts. Once you get really comfortable with that, then learn SwiftUI, because chances are if you're looking at getting into this world in the next year or so, you're going to need to know storyboards.
Okay. So maybe this is an easier question, but I would ask the same thing about Swift and Objective-C. Like maybe the obvious answer is learn Swift. Do you think it's necessary, or do you think it's like beneficial to learn Objective-C?
Absolutely. I think if for nothing more than just exposing yourself to another language, that's important in and of itself. But here's the thing with that. You're absolutely going to want to learn Swift first. Swift is a much more elegant language right now. It's a lot easier to understand as a new developer. But the cool thing is, whenever you really master Swift or just get in general, just get good at it, Objective-C is not that hard to pick up afterwards. It's a more ugly language, I would say. Hopefully nobody takes offense to that, but it just kind of is. It's a lot more.
That's accepted.
Yeah. So, but if you understand Swift, the underlying framework that you're communicating with in Swift is the same thing that you're communicating with in Objective-C. I mean, you're still going to have the UI buttons. The properties of Apple's classes are going to be the same. It's just a different language. So you're just going to have to translate it, but they're very similar in the way that you're communicating with Apple's code. So
I 100% agree with you, but I'm gonna throw like the I'm gonna like throw out like the just like maybe not a different opinion, but like some like counter examples, or like that's not it. I'm gonna throw out some reasons why like learning Objective-C could be good, like some benefits of Objective-C, and I'm curious if you have any of those. One of them would be, because I know Facebook does this still. Facebook's iOS app is still for their like the part that's interacting with the phone, it's all Objective-C. And the reason they do that is because they have their Android app, like front end piece, and their iOS app that's in Objective-C, but they have a whole bunch of shared logic that's all in C++. Mm-hmm. So you can have that native, you can share like those native libraries. Right. So like that's at least one benefit of, if you're going to start an app, do it in Objective-C. And like for the game, I had mentioned, we could do that same thing with like the game engine that I was working on. So we could do that same thing. Are there any other benefits of Objective-C that you can think of?
Yeah, for sure. One other benefit of Objective-C is that you are going to, at some point, be looking at Stack Overflow and finding answers to solutions. And it's becoming less and less common these days, but it's still very much there that you're going to find an answer that's in Objective-C.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know Objective-C, you can translate, and the solution is probably the same. You know what I mean? So that's a really good reason to know Objective-C. That being said, if I was a new iOS developer getting into it, I would not stress about Objective-C. We can come up with a lot of reasons why it's good to know it, but ultimately it's not necessary. And at this point, Swift has been around for so long that you're likely going to find a job where they use Swift. And you could make the decision. I mean, it's all about, if you're a new developer, it's all about getting to a point where you finally have enough skill to get a job. And if you know Swift and you don't know Objective-C, there's a job for you. I would get Objective-C because all you're doing, or I would learn Objective-C because all you're doing when you do that is opening up more doors for yourself, which is obviously really good. But it's not necessary. But yeah, I would encourage it. I would take a crash course on Objective-C after I got good with Swift.
Well, even the Facebook interview, like you're allowed to do it all in Swift.
Mm-hmm.
So they're fine with that. Like they'll tell you that like we are like 100%. I don't know if it's 100%, but whatever. Like a large percent is Objective-C. But if you're not comfortable with that and you want to do it in Swift, that's fine too.
Yeah. And actually, this is pretty common with a lot of jobs, is that they'll tell you, we actually, they'll give you like a little code challenge or something. And a lot of times they're like, feel free to use whatever implementation you want.
Yeah.
I've even gotten code challenges from jobs where I would ask them, like, what do you write your code base in? And either they wouldn't tell me, like, basically my question is, do you use React Native? Do you use just native iOS? Do you use, Ionic? Like, what do you use? And sometimes they would tell me, or they wouldn't, but they would still tell me, we don't really care what you write it in. Write it in whatever seems comfortable for you. And I think that, even when we interview people, we kind of do the same thing. I like to see people do it in native iOS because that's what we use. But I can totally understand why an interviewer would just say, do whatever you want. Show me what you're comfortable with. Show me a little bit about your developer personality by picking whatever you think seems fit. So anyways, that's, it's pretty common for a job to say, do whatever you're most comfortable with whenever you do this little code challenge. So,
yeah.
So, in that world, when Swift kind of first came out, there was a lot of pushback from the Objective-C gurus, right? You talk a lot about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if they were gurus, but yeah, like, that's the thing is, like you had mentioned this before at the start of this, but I knew a couple of iOS programmers who had been programming maybe only 3 or 4 years, but they all hated Swift, and I had never touched it, but I was like, oh, it seems like a better language. So I would ask them, like, what don't you like about it? I just don't like it. And my feeling was like I would try to push and try to understand why they didn't like it. And I think they just weren't comfortable learning new stuff.
Yeah.
And I really think that was a big piece of it. Cause now I've used both over however many years I've been programming, I've used both. I'm 100% in the Swift camp. I don't know why you would choose Objective-C.
Yeah, I think as a developer, you should definitely embrace new technologies. And I don't think there's any good reason to be the type of person that doesn't want to or that's opposed to it. Like, I can't find one redeeming quality in that. Can you think of anything that's like redeeming about saying I don't want to learn this new technology?
No, I can only think of reasons to not do that, because like maybe it's job security at first, but then like after like that technology will get old.
That's a really poor attitude too, to say like, I'm not going to allow this company to keep making advances in their code base because of I want job security, and I want job security through not embracing new technology. Like that's just not good. So on the opposite side of the world, we have of the metaphorical developer world, we have Java versus Kotlin. Kotlin's obviously the newer Android technology, which you work with a lot more. Was there any pushback, do you remember, from that?
In the community, so when I started the project for our current company, I didn't know Kotlin. I was excited to jump into it because I knew that even at the time, Google had just like adopted it 100%. They said Kotlin is a language going forward. But there was still even tutorials at the time, a lot of people said if you're learning Android, like they were still favoring Java because they were saying like exactly like you were saying, there's going to be tons and tons and tons of tutorials in Java. So if you're learning, that's going to be easy. Since I've been programming for a while, I wasn't worried about that. Like it's easy to translate, like how do you do an array or how do you do a for loop or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was like a little bit of pushback in that, but I was 100% into it, and I'm not a fan of Java. Maybe that's harsh. I'm just not. I don't know why people wouldn't adopt the new thing going forward, because in this case, I'm not actually. The funny thing is, I'm not an early adopter with phones or whatever. But in this case, with like the language, yeah, like I don't know why you wouldn't do it. Like older languages, Objective-C has this problem, and Java has this problem where like they'll try to bolt on new features, but it is exactly that. It's like it's bolted on. The language itself wasn't necessarily meant to do that. Even the guy who invented Java, so Java is 100% only classes, by the way. Like everything is a class. Mm-hmm. And then somebody asked, if you could start Java over again, what would you do? And he joked, he goes like, I'd take out classes. Right? And that's kind of a joke, but like he just feels after so many years in the language, not everything needs to be a class. It doesn't have to be that way. And that's kind of how Kotlin is, right? And so it is more of a modern language. It makes things easier to write. You don't have to worry about like the value types versus reference types and boxing and unboxing. I know you have to worry about that stuff in Objective-C and in Java. So it's not fun. With Swift and Kotlin, programming is just more fun.
It is.
I really like that.
So an interesting thing about new technologies when it comes to Android that's pretty different than iOS is Apple takes the more like brute force approach, and they're like, look, if you want to use this new technology, you have to use the new iOS or you can only support the new iOS version and up. Like with Swift UI, they're pretty brutal. No backwards compatibility. iOS 13 and up, or you don't use it.
Well, even with the language itself, right? So like if you want to adopt Swift 3, like because I remember transitioning from like Swift 2 to Swift 3 in a project. Mm-hmm. If you want to support Swift 3, you can either upgrade or not use those features.
Right.
And that was it. So like your app would still run. You could still do whatever you want if you're using Swift 2. But if you want to use the new cool things of Swift 3, you have to go in and fix everything. And they would be breaking changes.
Yeah.
I know Swift 3 to Swift 4 was the same thing. They updated strings a lot. It's breaking changes.
Yep. And with Android, they take a fundamentally different approach where they say any new technology that comes out, don't sweat it, we'll backwards support it, which kind of makes this whole topic kind of completely different on Android, because I feel like while people do get, I guess, man, this is hard, because in some sense, developers can just get really excited about new technologies because they don't have to worry about it affecting users on older versions, which is really nice. But at the same time, I think everybody generally understands that it's not all great with that. You can speak a little bit more to that. There's some typically like backwards compatibility issues, things that don't work properly, things that didn't get translated properly. So
I mean, like that's basically it. Like if you're making an open source library for Android, people want it to support like 4.1 at least, or something, or 4.4, which is like the Jelly Bean.
Yeah.
And like that's
so crazy.
And that's super old. Those phones are like 4 or 5 years old or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of we're still supporting, our app is still supporting Android 5, which is still like, that was like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so like they do offer support libraries, but the problem is, so like they have an updated list view. They call like list view was the original thing that's like a table view in iOS. They have something called the recycler view, which uses memory more efficiently, right? And you can use that on older versions, which, like you said, is like pretty cool. The problem is it's not guaranteed to perform the same,
right.
And like there might be bugs. So I don't necessarily like it because in an effort to support all of these older versions, maybe there's like tweaks and hacks and kind of weird stuff that they're doing.
Sure.
And like they're so afraid, in my opinion, they're so afraid to break something or just cut it off and say, you know what, we don't support that. So again, like there's pros and cons, because there's people all over the world, they use Android because they can't, like not like America where they can just update their phone. Like, oh, I'm going to get the new $1,000 phone every year. And so that's really powerful. But also as a programmer, we want to do like these new cool features, and it's like, oh, okay, that looks really bad on these old phones. Is it worth doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to pick, right? And actually, yeah. So I wrote a note here. One of the things is maybe it depends on, do you want to limit your viewers or your customers? So are you selling something? In which case, like maybe the piece that you're selling is, hey, this is a new cool technology that I'm doing in my app. And so I want you to pay for it. And like that, like your selling proposition is, it's this new cool feature. Or are you trying to just get exposure? Are you trying to get it out? I think GitHub has an app, and I don't know what it does exactly. But for example, if everyone's using GitHub and you have this app, you actually want it to be, because they're not selling it, they just want people to use it. So like you want to get it out to as many people as possible.
Sure. Yeah, the goal makes a huge difference. But I think one thing that ultimately harms Android, I'm sure they have just a ton of developer resources in developing the Android system. But I feel like when Apple comes out with new features, one thing that they're able to do better than Android is say, like, we're going to focus as much of our resources as possible on making this feature as good as possible. Yeah. And in the end, they're able to spend more time developing the feature and less time than Android for sure spends on supporting backwards compatibility. Yeah. It's like, what are we focused on? Are we focused on making this new feature as good as possible, or do we want to make it as good as we can, but under the constraint that we still have to support the old stuff?
Well, so this is related to games on mobile. iOS, I didn't understand why, so I had to do some research. But Apple and iOS, they made their own graphics library. So they're not using OpenGL, they're not using DirectX or even Vulkan. They made their own. It's called Metal. Mm-hmm. And I was really curious, like, why would they do that? And I had to go, and this is going back to like learning new skills. I had to go back and learn, because it was like completely new stuff, and there was like some resistance to learning it. But I realized the reason they did it was because OpenGL is pretty much available everywhere, and that is the graphics library that Android uses. Mm-hmm. The problem is they not only have to support OpenGL, it's like they're on OpenGL ES 3, but they have to support OpenGL 2.1 and 2 and 1, right? And so they're still doing that so that this code can run on these old machines. Apple said, you know what? Why are we using this generic solution? Let's build a graphics library specifically for our hardware. We know our hardware because they build their own hardware as well. Yeah. And so they know the exact instructions. It's optimized for their stuff, and you can get like 10 times the performance on besides the fact that the phone is more powerful, right? Like like on the equivalent powered phones, Metal will do still like 10 times the performance.
Yeah.
And they also optimized it, like because they were able to this is more techie, but like because they were able to build it from scratch, they saw some of the pitfalls, like, okay, where is the bottlenecks? And like bottlenecks on graphics libraries is like whenever you're changing state. Mm-hmm. So if you want to change a texture or whatever, or change a shader, that's like a bottleneck, because actually every frame OpenGL is checking to make sure it's in a valid state. Like that's a bottleneck. So Apple also said, okay, well, while we're doing this, let's force the programmer to validate the state beforehand. Here's this state. Mm-hmm. Now it's validated pre-draw cycle, and then afterwards, like, you can just use it, and we don't need to validate it. And so, like, that's just a small example of, like, in this case, new technology is massively better. Yeah.
It's pretty powerful that Apple's hardware department can say, like, yeah, we have this software limitation. Hey, you guys fix this, or vice versa. Yeah. That's pretty cool. And in general, the software community generally understands the idea that, and who was it that said that, that those that care about software will also create their own hardware. Can't remember the guy's name. I'm going to get roasted for not remembering this guy's name. Anyways, he was like one of the founders of, I want to say modern day programming, but I guess programming in general is pretty modern.
But I know that was, like, if you read the Steve Jobs biography, that was his attitude. That's why they ended up, when they were making the iPod, they ended up making iTunes as well, because he said the software that interacted with all these, like the third-party software that they were going to go with, was all trash. And he goes, like, no, like, let's make it end-to-end. Like, this is completely our stuff.
Yeah. So my question for you is, since you spend a lot of time in the Android world, and I think right now you have an Android phone yourself, do you think that because of the way that Google made Android, and what I mean by that is they created a system that can run on anybody's hardware that they create, and it's just this kind of like universal system that can run on everything. Because they made it that way, do you think that Google has an obligation to keep creating all these support libraries and keep supporting that style of engineering with Android?
Yeah. Okay. So the question was, do I think that Google has do I feel that they have an obligation to keep making support libraries? I think they have. They probably have an incentive to do that. It's kind of like the Microsoft versus Apple thing. I think. So in the early days of Windows, Microsoft knew that everyone was pirating Windows.
Yeah.
And they didn't care because they wanted to be the dominant operating system. And so I think that's part of the reason why Google does it. So again, I don't know if it's like if they actually feel obligated, but I can see there being an incentive because like things like Kindle Fire uses Android. I'm sure there's tons of other stuff. So if they can get more and more people to adopt it, like that just gives them more of the market share.
Well, let me explain my question a little bit better. What I mean by do they have an obligation is Apple can kind of make whatever decisions they want because it's their company, and if it negatively affects their company, then they made that decision internally. But with Google, for example, making Android, what I'm asking you is, do they have an obligation because they have other companies that are relying on their software to keep their business alive, such as Samsung. Samsung makes phones. Samsung has old phones out there in the market that they still want to work well. So does Google have an obligation to support those companies by continuing to release support libraries? Does that question make sense? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to answer it though.
It's a tough. I mean, because there might be some like legal contractual agreements that Samsung and Google have. I just wonder. I don't know if like ethically is the right word, but it does seem like Google put themselves in a position where they kind of do need to keep their software as backwards compatible as possible, so that they don't get in an argument with Samsung and LG and all the other companies that make Android phones.
All the companies. Yeah. So, I mean, it could be actually. Maybe there is something like legal where like all these people said, hey, we're going to adopt your operating system. I mean, like even Windows did that for a long time. You could go, like if you had like Windows 98, you could select an executable file and you could say like run this in Windows 95 compatibility mode or whatever. Or like if you have like Windows 2000, you could choose Windows 98, Windows ME, Windows 95 compatibility mode, and it might work. It wasn't like 100%, but like that was like they were stuck when you are like the dominant, when you are that dominant software provider, and like dominant is like maybe Apple's actually dominant, but like dominant in the fact that other people are using your operating system and counting on it. Then like, yeah, I'm sure they would feel that obligation. They can't just start over from scratch, or like people would be upset if they started over from scratch and said, oh, this is actually Android 2. All those other phones are broken.
Yeah. Well, this whole like obligation also comes into play in a way for the recent Apple development. When they came out with Catalina, they said no more 32-bit applications. They won't run anymore. And so a lot of people got really upset about that because, I mean, you can't argue that like it would have been easy for Apple to continue to support those. It was probably just some decision where, you know, it's like typical Apple. They want to keep moving things forward in their direction, so they just kind of cut everybody off.
Yeah.
But it's like, do they have an obligation to keep those companies that made 32-bit software afloat? You know what I mean? Like, is that their responsibility? I guess not. I mean, Apple tends to take the more brutal approach, but it does seem like there's a lot more companies in the hardware and software world relying on Android than are relying on Apple. So it's an interesting world where these two companies that are competing with each other have drastically different approaches on how they deal with it.
Yeah.
So anyways, I guess the last thing, enough about Android and iOS. The last one is kind of the vanilla JavaScript versus Vue versus Angular versus React.
So the reason I brought this one up too, and I'm going to throw this at you because you have experience with a couple of these. You started as a web dev. Is that right? Yeah. So also some of the old developers that I had, or that I had worked with, they had been maybe programming for like 15 years or whatever. So they've seen like yet another JavaScript library. It's like, oh, this is like the flavor of the day. And some of them I could tell, again, I don't know if they were good programmers or just average or whatever, but like I could tell that they didn't want to have to go and learn some new thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we kind of mentioned it before, but I'm curious, like, do you get tired of learning new stuff, or how do you feel? You've used 2 of these, at least. Well, you've used 3 of these. Obviously, Vanilla.js, you've used Vue, and you've used React. Did you ever use Angular?
I did. Yeah, I've used all of these. Yeah, so there's a couple ways to go about answering this question. Do I get tired of learning new stuff? No, absolutely not. I love learning new stuff, and again, like we were saying earlier, there's no good reason why you wouldn't want to embrace learning new things.
To me, that is the job.
Right.
That is the job.
For sure. I mean, it would be the same thing if you were a pilot even or whatever. Like, you can't just not learn how to fly the new plane. Like, you're going to have to do it if you want to stay afloat.
That's it, yeah.
There are developers out there, and maybe pilots too, who knows, that are going to push back and maybe hold the industry back. Who knows? But so that's the first way to answer this question. Yes, I do like learning new things, and no, I don't really get tired of learning new things. What I do get tired of sometimes is it tends to be that this is really a JavaScript specific issue where there's a lot of fads, and they live and they die, and it seems like there's a lot of JavaScript developers out there that try to get all these people to adopt their new library, and then they stop supporting it, and then they kind of...
Is that like Bootstrap? Bootstrap was actually popular. Is that like one of those examples?
No, Bootstrap continues to support Bootstrap. I think that's a decent one. I guess just any library that gets people to adopt it and then stop supporting it, or...
Yeah, that'd be frustrating.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And I don't like that they just kind of become these fads. I don't know. I don't really like that part. And I also don't like sometimes JavaScript libraries, I've seen a lot where they tend to kind of convince new developers to use them as opposed to learning how to do that thing themselves. I'll give a bad loose example of this, which is like jQuery. So jQuery they came out with jQuery initially. It was a good thing in the beginning, I think, because it gave you consistent behavior from browser to browser. That was a huge problem early in the web development days where, two different or the same line of code would behave completely differently on one browser to another. So jQuery came along and said, we'll kind of even the plane, like we're going to make it not even the playing field, but we're going to make things consistent from platform to platform. So that was good. It became, though, at some point, jQuery just became a thing that just made things a little bit more convenient. And I mean, sometimes there's definitely a place for that, but there's actually a website out there. I think it's called like whyyoudon'tneedjQuery.com or something like that. And it basically takes every piece of jQuery code and just shows you this is how you could do it yourself. And I think that's really powerful because it's like, I would look at it this way. If you know jQuery, that doesn't necessarily mean that you would know how to do it in Vanilla.js. But chances are, if you know how to do it in Vanilla.js, you're going to be able to easily figure out how to do it in jQuery. Yeah. So you and I are big on this. Like even at our current job, we don't really like to just be like, oh, we need local storage or something. Let's just go get a library or whatever. Maybe local storage is a bad example,
our networking layers are both like we rolled our own.
Sure.
Right. And some people might think that that's like dumb or a waste of time. To me, it actually wasn't that difficult, first of all. And second of all, if I go work for another company or for whatever reason we need to switch over and use like Retrofit or OK HTTP, those are like the Android versions, I can do that. That's no problem.
Yeah. And on your current code base, if there's some really specific piece of business logic that has to happen, it's super easy to just go drop that in.
Exactly.
You wrote it, you know how it works, we can do that.
Yeah.
Networking is a really good example. Even in the iOS and Android world, there are libraries out there like Alamo Fire, I think is one for iOS. It's a huge one
for both. I think it's on both platforms. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong if you or your company uses that. Actually, I have no problem with people using libraries if it makes their life easier, as long as you're not using it as a crutch. Make sure that you know what's going on in the background. Like we have a library that I've used before that is for cropping pictures, and I actually put it in because it saved me a ton of time, but I read through the code. I made sure I knew what was happening. And in theory, I could just go recreate it if I wanted to. But at the time, that was a small piece of the application.
Yeah.
And it would have been there is a argument for you as a developer recognizing situations where it would be a poor use of your resources to spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks making a photo cropper when that's a small part of the application.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're Instagram, it's a big part, but like for other applications, maybe that's just a small piece. Know when you should use a library, but anyway, the whole point of this is like, no, I don't get tired of learning new things. Should you get tired of it? Don't get tired of it. Just know what you're doing when you're using one, and I don't know, support the ones out there like Vue is becoming really big. Support it. Like I like it. Let's continue to move forward with it. Learn it. Make sure you understand every bit of it. And keep learning. I have no problem. I like learning new things.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that's the job.
This was just a unique topic because we kind of got off topic there, but we are talking in this case about frameworks, which is a little bit different than just dropping a library into your code base. But anyways, no, I don't get tired of learning new things. I don't think you do either. I think it's toxic to be the type of person that doesn't want to learn new things. But again, just know what you should know. I mean, and that's really hard when you're a new developer, is to know what's worth learning. But here's one thing that I like to say is, especially if you're new, learn things that excite you. Don't get too focused on just learning what somebody tells you should learn. If somebody says, hey, you're a new web dev, you need to learn Angular. Like, why? Is that something I even want to know how to do? Like, you're not going to be excited about it if it's not something that you want to create. So focus on learning things that are, things that you want to ultimately create in the end, things that excite you.
Yeah. I think it was a benefit when I learned programming because I was learning game development. So it's like you play games, you want to make games. It kind of matched pretty well.
Sure. Well, this sort of segues into our soft skills section. Talking about, the first topic that we have here is, not being a cog, becoming that linchpin. Why don't you kind of explain to everybody what it means to be a linchpin?
Okay, so there's this author, Seth Godin, and he wrote, I think one of his most famous books is called Purple Cow, and he's talking about how to market, right? And so like if you want to market something, it has to be actually like remarkable. So if you see like a white cow or a spotted cow or whatever, that's not remarkable. But if you saw a purple cow, you'd go and you'd tell your friends. So that's the purpose of that marketing book, Purple Cow. He came out with another book. This is still old, and I've read it a couple of times, but I was rereading it again. And he says, like, the equivalent of a purple cow for a person is to be a linchpin. And it does kind of, like, match with that. So, like, linchpin is that, that piece of the machine, that piece of that wheel where everything else would fall apart if it wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if he actually makes that, like, distinction between being a cog or a linchpin, but that's the thing that people don't want to be when they get a job. They don't just want to be another cog in the machine. It feels good to be that, to be important and to be needed. And so two things that I used to say to my students, and I would say, like, focus on being really, really good, which is that book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. Focus on being a craftsman, but also focus on being really helpful. And I think that's important. And that's where this linchpin idea comes from.
So there's a lot of people out there that are there's a quote that comes to mind that I kind of want to see what you think about it, because it's in some ways goes against this. There's a lot of people that say everybody's replaceable. What do you think about that?
He mentions that in the book too. And he says, and because he says, like, here's, hey, secret message for like employers, like, how does he say it? Yeah, he says, like, you don't want your employees. I understand you don't want your employees to be linchpins because that means you have to pay them more. But then the problem is, like, if you just make your company cookie cutter, then somebody else is going to copy it anyway. Mm-hmm. And then he says, like, eventually, and yeah, I forget what, but he says people are replaceable, but it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to explain, I guess. Everybody is replaceable, but yeah, I guess that's it. Like kind of what I said. If your company is replaceable, or if you are replaceable, then I'm just rambling.
Well, I mean, point, like here's the thing. I guess as an employee, you should always look at it that way. Like, always be aware that there might be somebody out there better than you. Yeah. But try as best you can to not be replaceable. That's kind of the way that I want to look at it. Like, because in general, being a linchpin means that you're not replaceable. And hopefully you can strive to get there. But
and that's, you're right. Everybody, at some point, everybody is replaceable. So a big part of the book is he uses like kind of like colorful language. So he says become an artist, like give gifts, like focus on doing this stuff, not just for what you get out of it. Like obviously, hopefully if you're programming for fun, right? And so like try to find that joy and look for where you can help. So like the app that we do is like helping people, right? I really believe that. Yeah. And then like one of the other apps I worked for was like relatively like a boring business app. And so I was asking the product manager, I was like, who are we helping? And we were helping like business owners, like entrepreneurs. And I was like, okay, that's something I can get behind. So like we're making an app, like even though the day-to-day stuff, the features we're building is maybe boring, we're making an app to help entrepreneurs. And so that hopefully that can get you excited. And then the purpose of this is, yeah, like everybody is replaceable, but literally if you are just the cog, if you're somebody who doesn't lean in, you just wait for stuff to happen, or you say that you have that attitude of it's not my job. When the recession comes, when the pandemic comes, you might be the first out the door, right? Whereas if you're the type of person who, I'm part of the reason I'm curious about your attitude about this, because to me, you do a lot of this stuff. When like you didn't know Laravel, like you were learning Laravel because you were doing like a side project, but we've been having, we need more Laravel developers for the mobile app on like the stuff that we're doing, because we need more help with like the APIs. Yeah. And I didn't know it at all. I'd never done any APIs at all. You jumped in and you started doing it. Yeah. Right. And like you're like the back end tool that you're doing, like you did no Vue, but like you're jumping in. It's like instead of just waiting, you're getting that stuff done. You have your hands in like all of the code. And so I don't know if the bosses consider you like a linchpin, but my guess is like you're not going to be first to be fired we are going through a pandemic right now, but like, so I'm just curious, like, do you do that on purpose? What's your attitude?
So I guess I have a healthy relationship with the bosses at our job, because basically I look at it, this is the selfish side of me. We'll get into the selfless side here. I mean, the selfless side is that I want to help the company. I like what we're doing and I want to make it better. The selfish side of me is like, okay, I can't really do my job effectively right here if this piece isn't done, and nobody's going to do this piece. Yeah. So let me figure out how to do it. And the selfish side of me is like, well, you're willing to pay me to learn this new feature? Yeah, absolutely. And the cool thing is about the company that we're at is they absolutely support that. Yeah, sure, we'll pay you to get better at that. That makes you even more valuable to us. So,
so that's part of the reason I like this book. And I think this is a biblical thing, but because I mentioned it to you before, but he basically says when you give gifts, it benefits you more than the recipient. And that's in like, without being selfish, I agree with that. Like, you're getting paid to learn, you're getting the experience. You are now known within the company as like a good developer versus the opposite. Right? Like, is it better to have the opposite of like, well, Cole doesn't really want to do anything that's outside of his like square box. Yeah. And so like I don't think that that's good. So I absolutely agree with you. I think it benefits you. I guess this goes back to what we were talking about before. Why not learn Vue and Angular and React? Now I'm pro. I'm not, but like for example, somebody who learned all of them, they're pro at all three. I can do whatever you want. Yeah. Like, it just makes you more valuable.
Especially if there's an opportunity at your company to go learn this new skill that makes you more valuable to them and also makes you a more knowledgeable developer. I mean, it's a win-win. It's a lose-lose if I decide, this little piece needs to get done, but I don't know that. I'm not interested in learning it. Well, now I'm sitting here not doing anything. That's bad for the company. Plus, my job satisfaction is low because I'm just sitting here doing nothing, and I'm not getting any better. So that time that you would otherwise just be sitting still, you're learning a new skill, you're moving the company along, your job satisfaction is better, and now you have fixed that thing that you needed or developed that feature that you needed to keep moving on the other end. It's just all around better. And so, yeah, I guess in a way, you being in that position allows you to keep all of the cogs kind of moving in a way.
Yeah. So also the reason I like this book and the reason I brought it up, this kind of contrasts with, there's at least a couple of popular YouTubers like programming YouTubers who it seems like all they do is they complain about they have like the opposite attitude. Like don't give gifts. You're paying me for this time and this job. This isn't in my job description.
I've worked with a lot of people like this.
Yeah. And like I understand on the surface why they might say that, but only on the surface. Like to me it's not even one step thinking. It's like,
well, what's the surface? What do you think is what do you understand about that? What's the surface level thinking there that makes that justified? Just because you don't think that it's their response? Is that what you're saying? Like, you hired me to do this, and it's not my responsibility?
This is what you're paying. Yeah, this is what you're paying me for. But again, like, I don't agree with that. But
sure.
Yeah. But, like, that's why I think if you look, and you just named all of them, if you look at the, like, second order benefits, they're just, it's way more valuable. Like, my dad, he always worked 2 jobs. My dad actually, like, he was like a workaholic. My mom thinks so, right? But he kept working. He's always had 2 jobs. He's constantly learning his whole life. And he'd work, at job A for way too long, like way extra hours. But then he'd be able to jump up and get like a good size raise. And he just recently retired, and he retired making a pretty good amount of money. And so, like, you can use that to, like, you learn these new skills. You can jump to the next job, or maybe this job promotes you, like, again, the second order benefits is just, you can't even calculate them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And like, if you're that person, that is that way, I'm always curious, because I've worked with a ton of people like that. Like, that's not what I'm being paid for. I just, like, I can't even understand that attitude, because my first thing is like, are you proud? Like, is this something like, do you go home at night and talk to your family and be like, I stood up to them, I'm not going to learn anything else? Like, what are you teaching? Like, what funny. Are you, especially if you have a kid, like, what are you teaching your child? Like, that's awful. It's toxic to everybody around you. And like, if you're this person, hey, let me let you in on a little secret. Nobody wants to work with you. Nobody likes you. Like, that's so bad. Like, lose that attitude, especially in a world where programming, if you want to be in this industry for 30, 40 years, there's no way that the one thing, like, let's say one thing right now, there's no way that that's even going to be a thing in 40 years. Yeah. You have to keep learning. That's the name of the game. Absolutely. If that's not the type of person you are, let me tell you, you're getting into the wrong industry. Yeah.
Maybe that worked for programmers 30 years ago because technology was changing slower. But now I agree. I don't
rapid.
One of the other things that he mentions in the book, when people say it's not my job, the interesting thing about those people is they're not happy with their particular project that they're working on, but maybe they want to work at Microsoft or Bungie or Apple, right? So they want to actually do bigger and better projects without realizing that, you have to, I guess this is even back to what we were talking about before, like being patient and learning. Like, if you're not giving your all and pushing at this company, like, let's say it's like small company X, why does Apple want to hire you? Why does Microsoft or Bungie or wherever, right? So like you have to do those things and like become hopefully like well known in your community, or like dev community or whatever, and then they're gonna become searching after you. And that's like the last point about this section. Like, strive to be more than just average, because like average is, you're easy to fire and you are easy to replace. Yep. And so he says, like, there's the chapter's heading is like, Google yourself. Like, Google yourself. Do you even show up? Like, you want to be Johnny Ive. You want to be like the next lead designer because you're so good at designing, but nobody.
So good they can't ignore you.
So good they can't ignore you, but nobody actually even knows you. So like, and he's saying like, do like the work. Like, it's not just enough to have a resume. And he says, actually, maybe don't even have a resume if you want some of those jobs. The work is the resume. And the way you get that work is by getting well known, like by Googling, like by having high Google results. So start a podcast, start a blog, work on interesting projects until completion. So like have like whatever our app is, my goal is really to have it be like an award-winning Android app. Yeah. I want to have millions of users. I want to have helped a bunch of people. And again, that helps the company. But then selfishly, it also helps me because then suddenly people know who I am. Mm-hmm. And again, like if you have that, if you just have the attitude, well, it's not my job, but I would work, but I deserve to work at Apple. I deserve to be Johnny Ive's boss. And it's like, that's kind of like a ridiculous attitude.
Yeah. Do you think that that's because people, I sometimes wonder if people like that are just not motivated by the work that they're doing. So, well, here's a question for you. Let's say that somebody is in that situation where they're not passionate about what they're doing. Is that a justifiable excuse for not pushing yourself and not continuing to learn and apply yourself?
He does mention this in the book as well, and he says like passion isn't project specific. And he doesn't mention any like caveats, but maybe if it's like a really toxic workplace, so like other books have mentioned that, like if it's a really bad workplace, maybe there's like extenuating circumstances. But he says no matter, like in general, you should lean in. And this would be my advice as well. If you don't like your job, continue to work hard at this job. Soak in as much as you can while looking for a new job. There's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't check out at my current job because what if Apple doesn't hire me?
Yeah.
Right? So let's say I check out today at my current job. Now I'm doing garbage work. Now I get fired, but and now on my resume it's actually, oh, you got fired from X company. So that's not good either. So yeah, like maybe there's some extenuating circumstances, but his attitude in the book is more like just lean in, change your posture. Like maybe you can actually, if you change that attitude and you're trying to get stuff done, maybe your quality of life, your enjoyment of work will actually go up. And that's what he says in the book.
Yeah. I think that it's easy sometimes to be at a job. I'm sure that there's a lot of people around the world that are in a job where they're not passionate about what they're doing, but I almost refuse to believe that there's not something that you could get passionate about. You worked at the last company that you worked at. I know you weren't passionate about what they were doing, and it was under a lot of strict regulations. So you weren't even able to write all of the code that you wanted to write.
Yeah.
But you've even said that didn't stop you from writing it. Like you improved the application in a branch that was never going to get deployed, but you were excited about what you did, and you learned something from that. And not only that, but there's no way you didn't walk away from that industry knowing more about it than you did when you started.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and you tried to motivate people there too, which you also do at our current job, and that's a really powerful thing too. You can get passionate about motivating other developers and learning new technologies. Like there's always something to get passionate about. If you're so laser focused on being upset about the type of work or the type of industry that you're in, find something else to be excited about. And plus, there's so many psychologists that say you can improve your environment by just physically changing things about your body. Like you said, physically change your posture, sit up straighter, smile when you come into work. Even if you don't want to, just smile, laugh with somebody, tell a funny story, and then try to internally get excited about something that you're doing, laser focus on that. And if you just absolutely have to get out of there, I've been there. My last job, man, I hated it. I hated the guy, did not want to be there. But I was at least excited about what I was doing, and I knew that I didn't want to just get fired and not have money, so I just started looking for another job.
Yeah.
And there's probably somebody out there willing to hire you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And on the topic of being more than average, I would say it's a pretty average thing to do, to be upset that you're not doing exactly what you want to do. But like here's my thing with that. As when I grew up, it was a big thing in our home to not compare yourself to the average. And I would urge anybody to stop doing that if you're doing it. Don't look at your life and maybe say like, oh, well,
your goal shouldn't be to just be average.
Yeah. And if you truly think that you're above average, stop comparing yourself to average. Start telling yourself like, I'm going to try to be better than where I think I'm going to be in 10 years or so. I think it's Matthew McConaughey that says like the person that he looks up to is himself in 10 years, and he wants to beat that.
Can you do it in Matthew McConaughey's accent?
Yeah, no, I don't think I can, but yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's a really good attitude. Stop comparing yourself to the average. If you're looking at your life right now, don't just say like, oh, well, I make more money than the average person, or I have a better this than the average person. Stop comparing yourself. Start trying to beat who you think you could be in 10 years. Always just keep pushing. Get rid of the average mentality. I think average is just a toxic term, toxic lifestyle. Stop comparing yourself to average people. If you want to be more than average, don't even think about them.
Yeah.
Keep moving in your own direction.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's another key point in this book, and he got this idea from there's another famous author, Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, not The Art of War, The War of Art.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, and also in Linchpin, he talks about this concept of the resistance. So whenever you're trying to do that scary thing, like whenever you're trying to give gifts and do art and like push, there's this voice that, like, whenever you want to start a blog or whatever, whenever you want to start a podcast, there's that voice that says, like, don't do it, people might laugh at you or whatever, like it's kind of convincing you not to do that thing. And so he has like some tips on how to avoid that. But like, do you kind of know, have you ever felt that actually? Do you know that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I feel like that definitely bothered me more earlier in my life, just worrying what other people thought. I mean, that's like, obviously everybody goes through this, I think, at some point when they go through high school or college or whatever. But I think that, again, like you're looking at what average people think of you. Who cares? I'm not worried about it. I'm going to keep moving in my direction. Not going to let nobody... I mean, because the thing is, like, if you can eventually be the kingpin, if you can eventually get to the top of whatever industry you want to be in, they ain't gonna be laughing at you.
Yeah.
They're gonna regret ever sitting there and laughing at you in the first place. Whatever you did worked. So don't let other people faze you. There's always gonna be the naysayers, and there's always gonna be doubters. There's always gonna be haters. You know, haters gonna hate you. Like nobody haters ever
gonna hate.
Nobody ever got successful without somebody hating on them. Look at the most successful people in the world, like whether that's financially or anything else. Like I'm sure that there's a ton of people that hate Jeff Bezos or hate Elon.
Oh yeah,
it's gonna happen. Yeah. Elon Musk comes on podcasts and he talks about that all the time. How like he's got this funny attitude towards like Twitter replies where he's like, I like looking at the negative stuff because I just laugh. Like, you can't let it get you mad. You're going to have people that hate you. Gonna have people that don't like what you do. Whatever. Keep moving.
Yeah. You don't really seem... So here's an example. Because actually, you don't seem like a person who would have this. Like have this resistance. Here's a couple of examples where I had it. I definitely had it. When I was writing that book, right? Like, and some people might even call it like the imposter syndrome. When I was writing that book about game design patterns, there was very much that feeling of like, well, who am I to write this book? And so I kind of wanted to back out, but I kept saying like, okay, I don't have to actually care. Like, I don't have to look at reviews. I don't actually have to care. Like, the more important thing is I want to get this thing out, even if it sucks. Like, and so I kind of like told myself like, well, okay, maybe this book is going to suck, but like I had to keep convincing myself. The more important thing is, let me write a chapter today, or let me write 1,000 words today. Mm-hmm. And like by getting through that, like, that was one. Another just like resistance point. I think this is still resistance, and I'm not sure if you deal with this or not. I remember when I was learning so I had known like DirectX 9 really well. Like this is like a lot of years ago actually, and because I had built some games in that, and I had to learn DirectX 12 because they'd done a couple of jumps, and I bought a new book and I was cracking it open, and I physically felt it, but like in my head, right? It was, I guess, psychologically, but I could feel it. Like my brain was just tired. Like it knew how much work it was gonna take to learn this new like graphics architecture, because it was significantly different. That was the whole point, and I could feel like the strain, and like I consider that like that resistance as well, where it's like you're trying to do this new thing, and I mean even. We tried to start this podcast. Our plan was to start this podcast last December. And like, I don't know if that was resistance or not. It's easy to say, well, a bunch of stuff came up. Yeah. But like, well, we're starting it now. I guess that's a good thing. But
yeah, I think the thing is our brains tend to see some goal, and they tend to say like you said, man, it's going to take a lot of work to get there. But really, this applies to anything, whether it's starting up some business or starting up a podcast or even learning programming. You've got to break this thing down into manageable chunks. Mm-hmm. I've even talked to family members about this before, where it's like they have some goal, and I'm all for goals. Everybody should have a goal, but don't set an unrealistic and unachievable goal that's daunting to look at and that you're going to fail. Like, set up manageable.
I'm going to lose 50 pounds in 3 months.
Yeah, that might be crazy. Like, so break it down into something that's more manageable. Like I like to, like if it was losing weight, like instead of losing 50 pounds in 3 months, I want to lose 3 pounds by the end of the week. That's manageable. Let's do it now. Get excited about the result. And so if it's like something like learning a new programming language or something, break it down into manageable chunks. Like maybe literally by the end of the day, I want to get an application running. I want to make a hello world. That's my goal for the end of the day.
Yeah.
By the end of the week, this is where I want to be. Do that. That way it doesn't seem so daunting and you're not living with the constant strain and pressure of how long or how much effort it's going to take to the end goal. Let's just get to the checkpoint.
So yeah, he mentions these two things, kind of like these two things in the book, but like your advice is interesting because it's kind of the opposite but still related advice that what we gave like in a previous episode where we said focus on micro failures. But like, so I think that is part of it. Like, just recognize that it doesn't matter if it sucks or if it doesn't matter if you fail. The goal is just trying to do it. And like, or like in your case, and kind of what he says in the book is like, do smaller stuff that doesn't get the resistance, or he calls it your lizard brain, that it doesn't get that thing scared. So yeah, it's like break it down. Well, it's hard to get scared about losing 3 pounds.
Yeah.
You can probably do that. Right. And then, okay, next week I did it before. I can lose another 3 pounds. So like you're not activating that lizard brain.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting.
I don't think it's opposite. And let me tell you why. I think that it actually falls very much in line with that micro failure thing. Because here's the thing. If I say I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next 3 months and 2 weeks in, I'm not on track, that's a macro failure. I messed up this really big thing that I wanted to do versus I want to lose 3 pounds by the end of the week. Okay, you lost 2 pounds. That's a micro failure. Let's move on and get to the next week.
That's a good point.
So if we break these things down into small checkpoints and you don't meet that checkpoint, that was just a micro failure, and let's move on.
And
but
and the iteration is shorter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I
understand.
I mean, it's the same thing if you say like, right now I'm not a software engineer and I want to be a software engineer in 3 months. Whoa there. Like that's an easy thing to fail. And that would, in your mind, you'd beat yourself up. You'd be like, I had this huge goal to be a software developer in 3 months and it didn't happen. Man, I'm bummed and I'm super depressed and whatever. Versus if your goal was just to, be able to create your own project in 2 weeks. If you don't get there, no problem. That was just a small failure. Let's pick up and do the next manageable thing that we can do.
And then hopefully you have something. Like in your weight loss example, you still lost 2 pounds, right?
Sure.
Maybe you don't have a working application, but maybe you have like the skeleton of one. Or it's like half of the features are complete. And those are like micro failures, but also like mini successes. Let's see. He says like the resistance is really trying to protect you from failure and rejection. Oh, so I mention that, focus on micro failures, but he also says, seek out discomfort. And we've used this, we've talked about this at work, get comfortable with discomfort.
Oh yeah.
And I do like that. And I think that's related to always learning as well. Like for whoever those programmers are who didn't like Objective-C or who didn't like Swift because they only knew Objective-C, I think they didn't want that discomfort because it can be like a strain looking at new code, like not knowing how to declare a variable or something like that.
Yeah. In Extreme Ownership, they kind of talk about how one of the really important principles of training early on in the military is that they put them in high stress scenarios early on. They put them in very uncomfortable situations. That way, whenever they're on the battlefield and life is on the line, it's much easier to make those decisions and deal with the discomfort and get positive results. So Jocko even says, like when he was running like the Tradet or whatever, like the training academy, he says he would run such difficult, impossible scenarios that there's no way they would encounter something more difficult in real life. Yeah, because he would like resurrect people, like because people aren't really dead in like the training. He would like resurrect. You're back alive. Nope, half of your platoon is gone or whatever. Like a bunch of different stuff, and he would purposely put them in those crazy situations, so that hopefully, but he says he's like there's no way they'd get in worse situations in real life. Yeah. I think like when you're a new developer, I certainly remember situations where I was given something that I didn't know how to do, and it would just stress me out. But now, if you give me something that I don't know how to do, man, that's my comfort zone. My comfort zone is being uncomfortable. Give me something I don't know how to do, and I'm all for it. And it's going to take some time to get there. eventually that is something that you're just going to have to, you're going to gain confidence whenever you're given some task that you don't know how to do and you accomplish it. Actually, I'd say, do you agree? I'd say this is one of the most rewarding things about being a developer is when somebody gives you a task that you don't know how to do and you come out the backside with something that works really well. Yeah. And like, that's the most rewarding thing. Don't you think?
And to me, it's kind of like a puzzle. I remember one time I was literally taking puzzle pieces from Stack Overflow. There was this, I mean, because everyone jokes about copying and pasting from Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
There was this feature that I was trying to do that like nobody had really done exactly before, right? Like 100% what I wanted. So, but like as I was looking at it, I was Googling some different stuff and I was like, okay, well, maybe if I take this piece over here and this piece over here, this thing over here, and I put them together and I got it to work, and I was like, yeah, that was like you said, like that's a big accomplishment. I didn't know how to do this. The answer wasn't even right in front of me, but like I pieced it together, and like, yeah, you gain confidence from that.
Yeah, and the more you get to experience those types of scenarios, the better it's going to be. And honestly, would programming even be that rewarding if it didn't involve things like that? Probably not very much. Like eventually you'd just get so good. I imagine being a lawyer, for example, is like a super rewarding career because every single case is different. Mm-hmm. You know, everything that you're dealing with is completely different. And then when you win, you're like, dang, you know, I just this brand new thing that I've never dealt with before, I was able to beat that. I mean, the most like the happiest people in the world are people like that constantly have new challenges that they get through. And I think as a culture of just a human culture, we really all try to embrace that. Try to be good at things that you don't know how to do. Get good and, you know, accomplish things that you didn't think that you could do, you know.
I think this last piece is also related to what you were saying. He says like use that, like if you start feeling that resistance, use that as a guide. Right? So if something is too easy or something is too comfortable, like, and other people have said this as well, you're not stretching yourself. So if you're not sure what to do next, kind of like feel like where is that resistance coming from, and maybe go towards that. Like do that stuff that makes you uncomfortable. Do that stuff that seems scary, right? Because then like you're stretching yourself. You're not just being that cog. Yeah. That's the easy thing. You're trying to become that linchpin.
And avoid complacency, which is essentially what you're saying. Like if you ever feel idle, like I'm not just saying this to toot my own horn, and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant of me, but I don't really remember a time since I started doing this professionally that I wasn't learning something that I didn't already know. You know what I mean? Or like working on some new technology that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
I hate the feeling of like complacency. And if there was ever some short period of time, like a week or two, that I wasn't motivated and wasn't learning this new thing every day, those are probably the valleys of my life, not the mountains. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I mean, within this stuff that we do, like building out the new architecture or building a new tool like you're doing, you said it's way more fun than just, of course we can build another layout screen. Like, okay, here, just display this text and these pictures with this button that already exists. I could do that all day long and I wouldn't have to think that much, but it's not that fun.
Yeah. And my last thing about this topic is that one thing I think, I'm trying to remember all the things that I felt as a new developer. I imagine there's a lot of new developers listening to this podcast. And one thing that I used to hate when I was a new developer is I'd get into conversations and people would be using words that I didn't understand, and they'd be talking about things that I didn't understand. And I used to hate it because it would just, it was a little overwhelming. It was like, there are so many things that these guys are talking about that I don't understand. But I think at some point you realize they didn't get there. They didn't get to a point where they understood all these technologies by remaining complacent. There's no doubt you could become an iOS developer and you could never go build an API. You could never go build a website. You might only know how to do that, but eventually that's going to take a toll on you, because you're going to hear these other iOS developers that know, they might be talking about this new feature that we're working on where we're interacting with this API, but you can't even join the conversation because they're talking about the actual back end side of it and things that maybe we like, changes that we could make to the API to maybe improve the app or whatever. And again, like that's going to take a toll on you because you're going to want to learn that stuff. So yeah, if you're ever complacent, like go learn something that you're excited about. Go learn something that, you don't already know. So
okay. So I highly recommend that book. We did just talk about it a whole bunch, but if you feel like reading it, I think it's worth it. I just have one question, because this is kind of related to the like that's not my job mentality. And I'm curious, like, do you think an unpaid internship is worth it?
Yes, worth it is a funny term, because like what does that mean for it to be worth it?
That's fair.
Is it worth it for you? Like,
would you ever do an unpaid? Let's say,
yeah.
Let's say, well, even now, actually, I might do it if I didn't have a current job. But yeah, like early in your career, would you recommend people do an unpaid internship if they have the opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for sure, if you're in college, like, the hard part is everybody's life is different, and so it's hard to say what makes sense for somebody and what doesn't. But I would say, let's take the approach. Let's say you're a college student and maybe you're working part-time, maybe you're working 10, 20 hours a week, and the money you're making is fun money. There might be people out there that are working and they have to have the money to pay bills, and maybe you don't have time for an unpaid internship. That's fine. I mean, that's fine. That's reality. That's gonna happen for some people. But I would say, if you're the type of person that maybe you're making minimum wage, working 10 or 15 hours a week for just fun money, you absolutely go get an unpaid internship. That money can't possibly be worth the knowledge that you could get from an unpaid internship, because at some point you're going to hit a point in your life where it's impossible to have something like an unpaid internship. You're going to have to pay bills. You're going to have to pay for things. But if you're in a position where your financial obligations are very small and maybe your only money is to pay for fun stuff, absolutely go get an unpaid internship. Like, you could, if you had an unpaid internship, you could potentially in a year have enough knowledge that you could go get some really good job that would be a whole lot better than what you would have otherwise done. Yeah. So if that's the position that you're in, 100%. I guess the thing is, my rebuttal question to you would be, it's hard for me to deny that it's a good thing, but what do you say for the person that doesn't have time to do that? Because that's going to be the reality for a lot of people, is that they're not going to have time to do an unpaid internship. What are the alternatives, and what would you recommend doing?
Well, I guess just going along with your question or with your answer, I obviously also think it's worth it because of like the experience you gain. First of all, you're going to college, and you're not just doing that for free; you're paying for it. Yep. Right. And then second of all, when you, like you said, when you're a little bit later in life, you have to learn for free anyway. Yep. And so I guess again, maybe not everybody can fit it into their daytime schedule to take that unpaid internship. But then really all you're doing is you're effectively doing an unpaid internship for your own company. Like, you're making your own projects. That's basically what you're doing, right? You're going to be making stuff for your portfolio to try to show that to some company, and then eventually try to get a job. So no matter what, you're doing that work for free. Yeah. So that's why, the question, is it worth it? Again, what does worth it mean? But in general, I would still say it's, no matter what, it's a net positive. Well, if possible, don't just focus on the money. Focus on all those other benefits.
Yeah. Here's probably the most important part of this question, and I don't know why I didn't start with this. I would say my answer is, if it's possible to do an unpaid internship, that is invaluable, because one thing that you could do forever is you could sit at home and you could just keep making projects that are hypothetical and whatnot. Yeah. You just don't even understand how much you will learn in the first month, first 3 months, first 6 months, first year of actually working at a company.
Working with other programmers, working with like senior programmers. Absolutely.
And if you are in that position, paid internship, unpaid internship, or first junior job. Soak it up as much as you can. Oh my God, yes. I do that right now. I guess at our current job, like, we're both considered like senior developers, but there's never a day where I'm not soaking information from somebody. Oh, yeah. Like, there's no way I could know. Like, the good thing about where we work is we happen to have a lot of really talented senior developers there, but there is something that each one of us knows that the rest of us doesn't, and you should be doing everything you can to absorb that from people. So absolutely. An unpaid internship, if it's an opportunity, if it's possible, do it. And the cool thing is too, the last part of this question, I bet it's a whole lot easier to find one than you think it is. There's probably somebody out there that's willing to not pay you and have you come in and do work for them. Like, it's probably not that hard.
It's funny, because when you put it like that, like, hey, can I do work for you for free? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's no problem.
Just here's the thing. The point of this conversation or this topic was not to offer advice, but I would just offer one more piece of advice. If you get the opportunity to do this, don't blow it. Do it well. And the way that you don't blow it is don't make it harder for the person to keep you there.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you've got questions, either talk to a developer that's not your boss maybe and try to get some stuff for him, but also just research.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that you have going for you as an unpaid intern is output is probably not, like you're not going to get fired probably for not outputting a lot. You're free.
As long as you're doing something positive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Net positive. Yeah. Go home, learn. That's just, if you could be an unpaid intern, do it and make sure you do.
Well, and just like the end result, like you said, you could sit at home and just do tutorials and your own projects all day long. The fact is, the end result, like working for a real company and like saying, hey, I worked on this piece of this website.
Oh yeah.
Looks 100 times better than like, I'm Matt Casanova. I run Matt Casanova LLC for the last 2 years or whatever, like making these stupid widgets or whatever. So
yeah, that's a huge resume builder. You don't even have to put on a resume how much you were paid. Doesn't matter if you were paid $0.
Nobody would care.
Put on there, I was a junior iOS developer.
Yep. That's
Boom.
Exactly it.
And that gives you a year of experience that you otherwise wouldn't have had. Because that's the thing that new developers complain about the most is that every company, like it's almost never that a company is willing to hire you with no experience. And it's hard. I get it. Like that makes it really difficult for new developers. So this is a great opportunity. If an unpaid internship is not possible, try to do something like what I did, which is I could not get paid. I had to get paid. That wasn't like at that point in my life I had bills, like I couldn't not be paid. So I got a job at a company that was in the industry that I wanted to be in, and then I was saying like, I'll work my 40 hours a week and then I got close to my bosses and I said, give me just 10 or 20 extra hours a week. You don't got to pay me. Like I'm not asking for more money. Just allow me to work with the developers. I'll come in early. I'll come in at 4 a.m. and do my job so that way I've got 4 hours at the end of the day to start working with these guys. There's always a way for you to do it. Every developer's got a unique story about how they got in. It's never, oh, well, I just applied and got my first job with no experience. Like you're going to have to do something unique. And so start to strategize that. Unpaid internship, working for a company and trying to get promoted, whatever it is, start trying to come up with that game plan.
Absolutely. All right. So to close things out, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. And so this was an interesting question. Last week we had talked about JavaScript on, SpaceX. We were saying how JavaScript is everywhere and JavaScript is easy to learn. So the question is, should you start with an app? Why would CODESHO recommend starting with app development?
So there's no doubt that a lot of developers start with web development. And again, we kind of talked about that last week. I think that's because the barrier to entry is pretty low. And I will not deny that the barrier to entry with app development is higher. So again, why would we recommend apps first? Well, there's a lot of reasons in my opinion. One, this is subjective. This to each their own. I tend to think that it's a little bit more rewarding because you get to experience a lot of technologies when you work with app development. You also do with web development, but I guess the thing is when you get really good at iOS development, it's kind of this like isolated technology and you're not really expected to know much outside of it. So I think it's rewarding in the sense that it's a very clear path what you need to learn. It's a lot to learn, but it's pretty clear. And because of that, I think it's rewarding. Like, without going into too much detail with like web development, there's so many different technologies. Every company uses a different, like they call them like stacks. Like, they might use Node and Angular and, like for the front end technologies, there's Angular, Vue, whatever. There are also frameworks for iOS, but in general, again, it's this like isolated world where if you get really good at just the core UI kit, Swift UI possibly, like if you get good at that stuff, that's enough to get a job. And again, you're not really expected to learn much more outside of that. So again, the path is pretty clear. Also, app development in general tends to be higher paying. Like just overall on average, it pays more. And I think again, that's because that barrier to entry is really low, it's really high. And, the supply of quality talent is pretty low. So if you're really good at iOS development, then, you can
find a job.
You can find a job. There's a really high demand for you. So, yeah, I think that's why I recommend learning apps first. And then also as a front end, we consider app development front end development. So if you get really good at that, making a transition into another world might not be as bad. It might not be as daunting. I didn't go this route, but I'd have to imagine that if I learned app development first, if I ever wanted to transition into web development, I think it would be a whole lot easier. So
I did go that route. Like
that's
if
right.
you think
That's
about
right.
it, like because I didn't know anything about web technology, and in my first job, that's what I told them. I I can build apps, like I can build because I started with games, and so there was gaps in my knowledge, but yeah. So to me, actually, and maybe this, like you said, there's the clear path of learning. To me, learning apps is easier, like because you don't have to learn that whole stack.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like you're not just learning HTML, JavaScript, CSS. You might be, but like you're learning command line and Node, like Node no matter what, right? Because like you're probably using npm, like package managers for stuff. Webpack is a thing that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like maybe you are learning like TypeScript or not. I mean, yeah, maybe TypeScript, but like maybe you're learning like Vue or Angular or whatever. So like there's a whole bunch of stuff that So yeah, like to me, it is actually, I would think it's more difficult to learn like web first.
I just think whenever it's a complicated one, because when I talk about the barrier to entry, I literally just mean what it takes to get started is a little bit less. Like understanding JavaScript is a whole lot easier than understanding Swift.
Yeah.
But I think in the end, it's better that way. And again, like I think most developers or anybody looking to go into any industry, one of the most daunting things about going into some new career is that the path to get there is really loose a lot of times. But with iOS, man, there's a ton of courses out there. Not all of them are great, but there's a ton of courses out there, and if you
can get started,
at least you could just get started and follow that path. So I definitely recommend apps, and they're really cool. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. Everybody uses them, and it's really cool to show somebody something that you built. And so anyways, I think that's really cool. Our second question here, this one's for you. What do you do about burnout?
Yeah, it was interesting because one of our coworkers had asked me this around like Christmas last just this like last November or December, and I joked around. I said, "Oh, I don't get burnt out," right? But then I was starting to feel it. Obviously, like we're working a little bit different during pandemic. Everybody's working at home, and like and there was like a couple of emergencies at work, and so I was starting to feel it. And so so to me it is a thing that happens. I really do.
I guess you want to pause? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to forget about that one. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. No, we don't have to pause. He was just typing. That's fine. We don't have to pause.
We're gonna pause.
Okay.
There was like too much of a pause there. Sorry.
Yeah.
How about this? I'll start back from the beginning, and I'll just say what do you do about burnout? I shouldn't have done that. I distracted you. Okay. I apologize. Okay, so it's hard to remember where you stopped. I'll just pick up. Okay, so the next question that we have here, this one's for you. What do you do when you get burned out?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because early. Like last November or December, one of our coworkers had come up to me because I guess during for the project that he was working on during Christmas time, he was starting to feel it. And so he asked how do you what do you do when you're burned out? And I just said, well, I don't get burned out because I love it. And I was kind of like joking around about it just because the projects that I was working on at the time weren't that tough. But like it certainly does happen. And it even happened a little bit during obviously like right now we're in a pandemic. Everybody's working at home. There's almost no clear delineation between like when do you stop, when does work stop, right? So and like there was a couple of like emergencies at work, and so it does. It is a real thing. I guess maybe the easy example is like take a break, like take a vacation. There's like that quote from or like the common advice is like. Stop and sharpen the saw, like the people like cutting down the tree. And so if you just keep working through the burnout, like you're going to burn out even more. And like, I guess this is also a balance, because like if the project needs to get done, like we had a legitimate due date on that project, it needed to get done. So you can at least look at it and say, okay, well, after this project, I can plan like a little break. I was doing, especially at that time, like around like early March and April, I was also working on my game engine. So I was probably programming like 12 hours a day, because I'd wake up at 4:30. I'd do my exercise, and like from 6 until 9 in the morning when we start work, I'm working on my game engine, right? And then so I was like working just like nonstop, which probably wasn't a good thing. I think that contributed to some of the stress. I think another small thing, I don't always do this, but I try to do this, especially because we are working at home, is I do try to take a lunch break. Like normally at work, I don't take a lunch break, but these days I've been doing it, and I do exercise. So I'll do like some kettlebell, or I'll do like whatever, some exercise program.
Yep.
And like that actually does, when I was at school, I used to take a walk, but like by doing that, like changing, like it feels like it changes my brain a little bit. And so like it allows me to stop thinking about the current problem, even if I have to get back to it that day.
Yeah, I have two things to add to that. One, there's this like funny thing that developers joke about is if you are experiencing some problem, like with your code, like if you have some bug or something, and those can be a huge cause for burnout. Like if you're just not able to get through this thing and you're really struggling, like you could get burned out really quickly. So one thing that we kind of joke about is a lot of developers, what they choose to do is sit there for 3 or 4 hours and just debug and not do anything but stare at their computer for 4 hours, and they don't get anywhere, or maybe after 4 or 6 hours they get the thing complete. But man, there's like so many times where if you'll just go for a walk and clear your mind, or sometimes when you're laying in bed at night, it's like,
and your brain is like percolating, like your background threads are actually working on that problem. Yeah, that's happened to me a lot too.
I think that has a lot to do with the fact that like your brain is there's no doubt that like they say humans are not very good at multitasking. Like we're really good at focusing on one thing.
Yeah.
And so I think what kind of happens is that whenever you're sitting there staring at your code and there's this bug and you can't get through it, and again, you're just getting really burned out, like your brain is not letting go of the thing that you're looking at. And it's not really thinking about the things that you're not looking at that could be contributing to that problem. Because a lot of times it happens in software development where the bug that you're experiencing is completely unrelated to the code that you think it's associated with.
Oh, yeah.
It's something completely else. So it's not until you're able to take that break and walk away, and then you're like, bing, that's what it was. When I wasn't staring at it, the other thing that's causing it kind of hit me. So that's the one thing. The second thing to add to what you're saying, and I like this attitude, Jocko says this. He says, if you think that you need a break, go one more day.
Oh, yeah.
And if you still need a break after that, then take a break.
Yeah.
So, and that tends to be true a lot, is like if you just get through this day, push, do one more, you might come out the backside of that second day and be like, I was in a rut. It is what it is. And you might be able to move on a lot easier than if you just kind of throw in the towel and completely break
and feel like maybe you feel like you're quitting.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, I understand. Yeah, especially when Jocko was talking about working out, but especially if you're trying to start your 100 days of code or whatever, like maybe, the whole point of 100 days of code is it is continuous, but like don't be afraid to take that break. You would kind of mention this, so the next question, I guess this is for you. What do you do when you feel like you're stuck in a rut and you don't know where to go, like before or after you start learning?
Yeah, so this happens a lot. Like there's the case where before you even start programming, you kind of you're sort of in a rut to begin with, because you're like, if you're interested in programming, I would say it's probably pretty likely that you're not a big fan of whatever you're doing now. You want to improve your life, whatever. So you're probably in a rut and you're trying to get out. And then this also happens after you start learning programming and you kind of hit this like maybe state of complacency, and you're just like, again, you're in this rut and you want to keep moving, you want to keep getting better, but you don't really know how, and the thought of doing it's maybe daunting, or you don't know where to go or whatever. So number one, reach out to somebody if you can. And I don't really buy that there's not somebody to ever reach out to. There are tons. If you're not on Reddit, get on Reddit. There's tons of subreddits where these guys talk about programming all day long. I promise you, those guys on all those channels, pretty much any forum that you find, people are going to want to help. People in general on the internet, despite what it seems like sometimes in the social media world, if you get into a forum of professional people, they're going to help you. They're going to be willing to. So I would start there. I'd jump on Reddit, and if the thing you're looking for is just advice, somebody will give it to you. The next thing, and again, I preach on this a lot. I said it in the last episode. I hope people don't hear me say this and just think like, oh, that's easy for you to say, or it's not that simple. I think it really is that simple. What you need to do is find something you're excited about and just start learning it. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't know what you're doing, like, you're gonna have to get started. Like, the first thing that I do whenever I approach anything that I don't know how to do is go to Google and type in how to do this thing.
Oh yeah.
Guaranteed that both you and me went to Google and said how to start a podcast. Like, what equipment do we need? How are we going to broadcast it? How are we going to put it up there? And that momentum would have never started if we didn't start by just doing it. Just get in there and, try to find the first thing to do. And again, like we've said already, try to do something that you're excited about. One thing we didn't really touch on so far in this episode is there's a lot of developers out there that will tell you what you need to learn first. And we even kind of just did it by recommending app development. But let me be clear. If app development doesn't excite you, don't do it.
Yeah.
Please
absolutely.
don't do it. There's like, I've heard developers tell, like, more senior developers tell people, like, you need to learn Python or something like that. And maybe that worked out well for you, but like, that may have excited you, or through your path, maybe eventually you got there and you're excited about it now, or it pays well or whatever. But like, I'm not going to tell you to learn Python if you're not excited about making command line tools or making data driven product. Like, that's probably not for you. Do something you're excited about. And I feel like the thing that I like about app development and websites as an entry point for new developers is everybody uses them and everybody can get excited about an application. And
you can show people right away. You can immediately show people.
Yep.
Yeah. Command line apps, no matter how, because the courses that I taught in school, we started out on the command line, and I told them, I go, listen, I know this is going to be boring.
Yep.
And it's like, to me, that is like important stuff. Doesn't mean that that's the best way to teach it. That's not what I'm saying. But like, it sucks because you'll go and you'll make this cool like encryptor, decryptor, so you can send messages to people.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's still just command line.
Yeah, nobody's excited about that. Yeah, they did that to me in college too, which we're going to be talking about pretty soon in an upcoming episode. We're going to talk a little bit about college and boot camps and stuff like that. But anyways, when I was in college, they did the same thing. They tried to teach us command line tools, and like, you could just feel the deadness of the room. Nobody was excited to be sitting there and writing these tools. Like, maybe at first there's some little element of excitement just because I'm programming, but like, you lose that enthusiasm very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're in a rut, let's learn something that we don't know that we're excited about. That's the place that I would start. And again, just get started. You're just gonna have to do it. So that's what I would do if I was in a rut.
So let me I'll just throw in mine, because mine's pretty quick, and it is actually related to burnout as well.
Okay.
Again, this maybe isn't for everybody, but this is unique to my personality, because I love reading books and I reread or I re-listen to books all the time. Sometimes I am feeling like I'm burnt out or I'm in a rut. Mm-hmm. And like, there's a couple of like go-to, like there's this guy, Grant Cardone, like you can find him on Facebook as well, but like he's written some like salesman books or whatever, and just listening to him talk just like gets me super pumped. And so like, if you can find some of those good books, like you're in a rut, maybe for like really good legitimate reasons, but also it's like maybe your attitude just needs a little bit of adjustment. And I'm not saying it's your fault, but it's like sometimes getting that inflow of that new person's attitude can like bumps me out of it. That's a good point. I shouldn't have been so eager to move on from this topic. This is still, there's a lot of things that we can do here. That's one of them. Changing your environment is another one of them. Mm-hmm. Like this is funny because I actually did this not too long ago. I kind of felt like maybe I kind of was in a rut, honestly. Like, I was just, since the pandemic kind of started, I was just like not very excited about anything. Like, the isolation sort of bothered me. And so I did kind of feel like I was in a little bit of rut, finding it hard to get motivated and whatnot. I just moved my desk. Like, I'm going to go somewhere else. And I also bought a new desk or whatever, and I put some lighting on it, and I liked it more. Like, I don't know why. That got me motivated, and I was excited to come sit at my desk. Whereas before,
it was an old desk. I've had it forever. Wasn't excited about it. Didn't where it was sitting. It's been there forever. So just moving it and getting a new desk made me want to sit at it. I don't know why. Changing your environment helps.
Yeah.
And sometimes changing your environment could be more than just physical. Like sometimes it needs to be a little bit psychological as well. Like maybe change something in your routine. Go for a walk in the morning. Go exercise. That's not what this podcast is about, but like the podcast is about, you know, improving yourself and whatnot. So if you're in that rut, it's like they say, like the definition of like insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Change something up. Go
Change
for
something.
a walk.
Yeah.
Go do something. So that there's a lot of stuff you could do if you're in a rut. I know a lot of people are there and it seems daunting to get out of it, but you're just never going to get out of it if you don't change what you're doing. So all of these a lot of these Q&A questions, aside from the first one, have been kind of like brutal, but I think these are the things that people want to know about. People want to know how to get out of these really bad things that happen, because life tends to kick us sometimes, and sometimes it's hard to get out. The last question that I have for you, and I've got an answer for as well, is tell us about a time that you were humiliated by something that you did, or a way that you behaved, or a feature that you, whatever it was, a bug, just the way that you dealt with something, and how did you get out of it? How did you deal with it?
The first thing that comes to mind, this isn't related to programming, but it is in my career. When I first taught, right, I was super gung-ho about going, because I was traveling to Singapore, and we were actually doing, I was co-teaching with somebody, and that was actually the thing that saved me. So maybe this isn't good advice, but like leaning on other people. So we had been, I think we came like a week before, so we had made sure everything was like prepped, and like we had planned out that first class. And then I get in, and like my buddy goes, "Hi, like my name is Professor, you know, blah, blah, blah." And then I go, "Hi, my name is," and I froze. And like there's only like 15 people in the class. And I was just like, I froze, and I didn't know. And I was like, and I looked over at my buddy, the co-teacher. Luckily, that guy was like, he had taken some improv classes or whatever, and so he was able to pick it up, and like he talked for like the first 30 minutes or whatever. Like he took over what I was supposed to talk about, and like he did a good job. Eventually he even stopped teaching, and I was just like, he was kind of like the researcher organizer, and I ended up doing all the teaching. But like that first day, I just remember, and I was just like, Oh, another time, this is also just when I was teaching, I said I had taught some iOS courses, and I was, in my opinion, I was a pretty good programmer, right? But to be honest, I'd only made like one iOS game. And we were teaching this, like just the way the school worked, they would tell people like, "Oh, hey, here's this course we're going to offer. So like let's do this course even if nobody's available to teach it." Anyway, so they offered this iOS course because I was popular. I ended up teaching it. One of the guys in there, this is like an introductory iOS course. He had been doing iOS for like 2 years. So he actually knew more than me. Mm-hmm. And like one of the things that I'm saying, I don't even remember what it was at the time, but I said it wrong. And he knew I was wrong. And he called me out. And I was just like, I'm sure my face got beat red. I'm sure. And I was like, and like, I mean, there's no real recovering from that except for moving on and saying, you know, I didn't get mad at him. I said, oh, okay, thanks. Like, mm-hmm. And he was respectful. He wasn't like yelling at me. He knew that I knew programming in general pretty well. Yeah. But he could just tell, like, "Oh, you don't know about iOS." And I was just like, yeah. Thanks. I mean, that's again, I don't remember the specifics, but like that was rough. Yeah, like that was rough.
Eeks. For the new developers out there that maybe they're already in the industry, or I don't know, maybe anticipating a problem that they're going to experience. Like, I guess tell us about a time that you did something at work and either your behavior had a bad result or just a bad mindset kind of forced you to do something that you regretted or wished you had done differently, and then how did you deal with it? We were kind of talking about a situation earlier today, actually, that you were talking about that, you know, happened a few months ago.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's like, I think I only told you about this, so I guess that's why I didn't come to mind about being humiliated. This is where I messed up, though. We had an issue. I think this is what you're talking about, the issue with the purchases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was an issue like unrelated to the app, but it was causing, like it wasn't the app code, but it was something on the back end that caused like you couldn't make purchases. Like purchases just wouldn't go through. And I think I was the one who discovered it. And like I tried to organize, I like talked with like our product managers or whatever, and I had figured out like whose code it was, and I got that started, and it just felt like nobody was making progress on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking with my wife, and I was just like, I'm so frustrated, but I feel like I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And then I didn't do anything, and that was it. And like I looked back at like 9:00, I was like, because we go to bed early because we're like old, and so I look back and I double check again at like 9:00, and I go, it's still not working. So I did get on, and I talked with the developer who was responsible, and I kind of helped him get like the code finished, like the PR finished, and then he goes, okay, so I'll send it to our lead developer, and then that was it. And I was like, I don't know, is that gonna? And I knew I should have messaged that lead developer, and I didn't. I was just like, man, I don't know, it's not getting done, and I just didn't do anything. The next day, you popped on. And because like you had even been talking with me, and I was telling you like, yo, I think it's being taken care of. But so I didn't communicate it to you either.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like the next day, so like it's been like 8 hours or like 10 hours where people can't make purchases, so we're not making money. And you were like you had messaged everybody. It's like, how is this thing still not working? And then I think within 30 minutes, it got like the PR got approved, and it went out. And so I was just thinking, like for some reason I felt so stuck. And I couldn't do anything. That wasn't the case. Really, that wasn't the case. I should have tried to like push. I could have been pushing or like orchestrating or just doing something more. I just didn't act. And like I remember thinking about that. I was like, I just did that. I did that so wrong.
Yeah.
That was a big mistake on my part.
Yeah, these situations happen a lot where like there's some issue that comes up that's not really directly your fault as a developer, nor is it really your responsibility. But I think it is important to, like, I guess you'd probably say that, like, this was not a good example for you of, like, extreme ownership of something.
Absolutely.
Like,
yeah, it wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, like...
Because it was affecting the app.
Yeah.
And I wasn't taking ownership of the solution.
So you can have two attitudes with something like this. You could have the attitude of, like, well, it's not my problem. I'll let somebody else deal with it. I'm not being paid to do that, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Nothing good about that. It's just toxic. Or you can have that extreme ownership attitude and lean on your team. You're on a team for a reason. It's not like you guys are working for different teams or different companies. You're all trying to get the same goal. Put some pressure on each other, ask each other the right questions, and try to keep moving it forward. Yeah, so I have like a little example of this story too that kind of affected me, just the time that I was humiliated and I handled something really poorly. And basically what happened, and I can talk about this openly now because this was at my last job, but basically what happened was I went online late at night. I was actually hanging out with my family out of state, and we had all been drinking a little bit, and I had to go get this thing fixed like in the middle of the night, and nobody was awake or online or anything. And I went on to the server and I made some change, and I did something that I didn't really know what I was doing. And basically what happened is it took down all of the websites that we managed and all of the APIs for all of the applications that we managed. And so the point of this company was to make applications for like artists, like like musicians and stuff like that. Yeah. So we had contracts with like 3 or 4 of these people, and we had like probably 8 or 10 of these applications, but 3 or 4 for like fairly significant people. And I took down all of their websites and all their APIs. And for like 2 hours, I'm sitting there trying to fix it. And by the way, this is a company that I hated. I hated the guy that I worked for, didn't like it. And I was just like, you know what? Like, what if I just like went MIA? Like, I can't figure it out. Like, I can't fix the problem. And like, I hate these people anyway. So like, very bad attitude. Like, really, really awful.
Definitely.
Not what I represent now. But this was also a few years ago. I was younger and just hated the guy that I worked for. So honestly, for like half an hour, I shut my laptop and I was like, whatever, I'm drinking with my family. Like, I'm having a good time. I'm not going to let this ruin my little vacation. So selfish of me. Whether or not I hated this guy, I was just about to take down his company's reputation. So that's not cool. Like, that's never cool. But anyways, what ended up happening in like, I'm ashamed to tell this story. Like, honestly, like I don't even want people to hear this about me because this
pretty
is
bad.
It's really bad. Like
Yeah.
I do not support anybody acting like that, and you know me. Like I would never do anything like that.
It doesn't
today.
sound like you at all now.
But I was just, and I'm humiliated. Like I'm just really embarrassed to tell that story. But like the point was that I was just super uneducated on the thing that I was working on. I messed up big time. And for me, the best way out, like what I was thinking was just like, all right, I'll just give up. So that's not good. How did I get out of it? I ended up doing what we were just talking about, which is I reached out to another member of the team and I was like, hey, dude, talk me off the ledge here. Like I'd had my laptop lid closed for like half an hour and then I opened it back up and I was like, I felt really wrong about it. I didn't feel right about it. So I called one of the other guys on the team and I was like, hey, dude, please talk me off the ledge here because I can't figure out what's going on. He didn't really know what was going on either. But I was like, I'm just ready to throw in the towel. This guy didn't like the guy that we worked for either. So he was like, you can't go out like that.
Yeah.
We'll figure this out. So we spent like another hour and we eventually, it was one of those stupid things that like, it wasn't what we were looking at. It was something indirect. So we ended up getting it fixed. But I guess the moral of this story is that you're going to have things that happen in your programming career that are going to be awful. You're going to mess up big time potentially. You're going to have to take some ownership of that though. And sometimes ownership means getting some help from some other people. So don't do what I did. Don't act like that. Yeah. Fix your stuff. Get people to help you. That's kind of
check the ego.
Check the
and
ego.
And like you can ask for help. Like what you in the end what you did was good, at least. You didn't make the horrible decision of just saying like F this.
Well, that's not me, and maybe my decision was partially motivated by just being with my family. We had been drinking. Maybe I wasn't the clearest head, but I mean, at the end of the day, just take some ownership, ask for some help, and that's really it. So that's kind of the end of episode 3 here. Any closing thoughts?
No, I think we literally said everything today.
Yeah, this was a longer one.
Yeah.
So get after it, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Yep, see you next week.